everybody. I'm Marilyn, the CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of our weekly live video series called Center Stage. Today, I'm really excited and a little bit emotional because it is our final episode of the season. For the past 6 months, the Centaurs and I and all of the wonderful guests that have joined us, we've been running this show and we've been focused on understanding the magic of teams. And honestly, we've really put in so much into producing the show and preparing it every week and bringing on, people with amazing insights to share around how to create high-performing, cohesive, connected, innovative, and happy teams. I'm also emotional because next week, in exactly a week, Cosmic Centaurs is going to be 2 years old. We're about to complete our second round around the sun, and it's been a truly amazing ride with an amazing team. But that's a story for later. Hopefully next week you tune in and you can see everything we have prepared to celebrate our 2-year anniversary. Now back to Center Stage. I just want to take a minute to express how grateful I am for all the insights that the various team leaders and coaches and academics that were kind enough to be our guests on Center Stage shared with us. I also want to express how grateful I am for the amazing Centaurs who every week put this show together, namely, although everybody contributed, but mostly Karma and Tala, who have been doing all the hard work in the background. I like to joke that all I have to do is show up and try not to mess up what they've prepared for me. And so I'm really grateful for that too. Now, since this is both the end of the season, but also the closing of our last chapter, as tradition goes, I'm going to be wrapping it up with a special episodes where it's just me talking and hopefully you guys asking a few questions. And kind of recapping what we've learned over the past couple of weeks from our speakers around this chapter, which was all about growing and scaling global teams. So I'll be recapping a little bit about what we learned from our speakers and also adding some of my own insights, having worked myself in both scaled or scaling and global teams. Before we begin, as always, and since this is the last one, give us a big hoorah, show us some love. Tell me where you guys are joining from. Give this video a like, add a comment, ask me a question. It helps to make it feel less lonely up here. Love to hear from you too about your own experiences. So if I say something that resonates with something you've experienced yourself, please do tell us about it in the comments. And of course, ask me questions if you have any. So let's get started. I think the reason we chose this theme for the last chapter is because following the pandemic, I don't think you can talk about teams without talking about both how to scale them, but also how to manage them globally. Even for really, really small organizations like Cosmic Centaurs, I think the pandemic has unlocked something where we are all more open to the idea that even if you're just a team of 2 or 5 or 10, like we are, you can hire people anywhere and you can onboard them and you can make them part of your mission. And so here we're going to be talking about both that global aspect, but also then how to grow from there. I like to say that Cosmic Centaurs has been global from day one. When we started the company, we didn't think that the UAE was our only country market. We didn't think that when we worked for companies outside of the UAE, we considered our work to be an export. Our team was globally, culturally, and geographically diverse, and we celebrate that diversity actually as a core contributor to our value proposition because we work with other companies that are global and scaled, and we need to understand them. And so we've had colleagues from so many different places, from Italy, from France, from India, from different parts of the Middle East, from Bosnia. And I think that that's really been a major contributor to the value that we create for our clients. And so in that sense, we've both had global clients and global team members from day one. And we think it's really important that everybody, every team leader understands what it means and how to manage in a global world, even one that is, threatened sometimes, especially in the last few weeks by conflict. But it's really important to understand how to think about these things. And that's why we invited Tariq Saiduddin from Zension and Pieter Mandem from WorkMotion to come talk to us about their own experiences around being global. I think that something that I learned really early on, and I've had the chance to work across my career in different organizations, and one of them, the one that I started my career in, which is called Keyword, was a small company, relatively speaking, 200 people, but it was a global company similar to Cosmic almost from day one. And I think there's a lot of amazing advantages to having global talent. I think Pieter Mandem, who's, as I mentioned, the head of trust and employer compliance at WorkMotion, came and talked to us about the technicalities of hiring globally, and we'll come to that in a second. But he also talked to us about the value of hiring globally, how it can help close the unemployment and labor shortage gaps, how it can give you access to incredible talent. And I think that in my experience in my first job, I really had a really meaningful example, I think, of the value of hiring globally. So this was a company that was a bigger group. It included the digital agency, but the biggest part of the business was actually selling books worldwide, books that were sourced in a lot of places and sold in a lot of places. And something that I learned about the value of hiring globally is that you don't just hire globally because it's cheaper or because you might not be able to find talent where you are. I think a really interesting value of hiring globally is to find what is called local performance and local specificity. What I mean by that, let me give you an example of Keyword where I was working at the time. We had a lot of different offices in many different cities, but we decided, for example, to set up in Brussels. And Brussels was where our design talent was focused. Why design talent? Well, because there's amazing design schools and aesthetic and a general art scene in a place like Brussels that meant that there was incredible design talent. In Paris, we had our R&D team. The French are quite well known for their scientific methodology and the level of the engineers and the thinkers that their universities can produce. In Montreal, we had access to global talent that, from the point of view of technology, was world-class, with working within the best practices and the conventions of how the US and North America was building, the tech world. But Montreal allowed us to subsidize it because it was a little bit cheaper than hiring in Silicon Valley, but still the same quality of people who just wanted to have a different experience. In our office in Beirut, that's where we experimented with new ideas, because when you live in a chaotic place like Lebanon, it teaches you a lot about being agile and experimenting and iterating. Dublin was where our content writers lived, because so many young Dubliners choose to go and pursue studies in literature. And so they are amazing writers. They're also really cultured and they have a great sense of history. Because we were a publishing company, we also set up warehouses in places like New York and London and Paris and Beirut. And those are all, publishing industry capitals. And they allowed us to tap into the wealth of the publishing ecosystem there. And so to me, in addition to everything we've spoken about and why hiring globally has a lot of value and how it's been unlocked these days, that idea of understanding local performance and specificity is really something that I wanted to bring home. And I think at the same time, if you're going to be global, you also, beyond understanding the local specificity, of course, have to understand the global pulse of the world. And you have to be really good at building resilience into an organization. And I think that that's the leader's job. Now, having myself experienced what it looks like to set up entities in a lot of different countries and having to manage the regulatory aspect and the taxation and all of these things that are really steep learning curves. I think it's really incredible that companies like WorkMotion and others have now developed through the pandemic. Of course, this is not a new concept, but have really become visible and have amazing value propositions around helping with that local setup, right? Setting up employer of record companies and being able to hire people on your behalf and manage things like contracting and payrolling and regulatory compliance and all of that. I think is really, really incredible, and it has opened up, every company's ability to do that, including smaller companies which might not have considered this in the past, simply because of the effort and the cost associated with them. I think Pieter also gave us a really important insight, which is while there's a lot of positives in hiring globally, he reminded us that once you hire your first individual from another country, you are undergoing a big transformation. And he emphasized the importance of properly onboarding team members and properly managing team dynamics so that they are healthy. I think that's definitely the case, that when you start to build a global team, you're also starting to build, in many ways, a remote team. And there's a lot you have to do in terms of how you structure things and your processes, and making sure that your documentation is in place and that everybody has a sense of trust also towards one another, that micromanagement is not necessary, that everybody is just empowered but also autonomous. And again, when Pieter talked about that resonated with a lot of my experience at Keyword. At the time, I was based in the Paris office, but my teams were in many of the cities that I mentioned earlier: Brussels, Montreal, Dublin, Lebanon, of course. And before the pandemic, I managed to spend a lot of my time traveling between the various locations. And I used to say that I was theoretically the leader of a part of the business, but actually my job was less about managing the business side than it was about building bridges and connecting people with one another. And my metaphor for my job at the time was that I looked like a phone operator in the old days, where you see them kind of taking a cable and plugging it into two parts of the dashboard so that they can connect people to each other. And I think we really shouldn't underestimate the importance of building those bridges and connecting people together. A big part of managing teams globally, therefore remotely, is of course around the process and the systems that we put in place. But I think that maintaining healthy relationships, measuring team morale even when you're not together, learning how to build shared values, and shared alignment towards a purpose, but still keeping space for local knowledge and culture, is something that's really, really important. And ensuring that while your organization is aligned, alignment doesn't necessarily have to mean sameness, and that you take the time not just to celebrate the diversity, but to also listen to it, to also learn from it. And I think in that space, the importance of culture and people really emerges. It's important everywhere, but distance makes everything a little bit more complicated. And in that sense, I think what Tariq Saiduddin, who's partner and CEO of the Zension Technologies, spoke to us really resonated as well, right? He reminded us that it's really important to keep the organization aligned to its purpose. He also pointed out that it's okay to let it evolve as the company grows and scales, because different people bring in different parts of the culture. He was very honest and transparent about the fact that it's also so important to let people in, to let them contribute, to let them evolve what you've built. He shared with us that when he sits down with other leaders, those that have joined the company perhaps a little bit later on, and they do diagrams on words that they feel define the company, there's always a new word that emerges. And that's a good thing, because culture needs to evolve and you need to accompany that change. But he did also mention that the core culture of a company doesn't change that much. what the organization stands for, what the purpose of an organization is really something that, regardless of where you're hiring people from and how fast you're growing, should be something that you keep close to your heart. And of course, his insights and alignment on purpose remind me of a story that I love to tell. I think I told it in the episode with Lucy Dabo, but I'll tell it again, which is for me the perfect anecdote to explain what an aligned organization looks like. And so the story goes that as JFK was visiting NASA headquarters in the 60s, he was touring the facilities, and he happened to come upon a janitor who was mopping the floor. So he introduced himself and asked him what he did at NASA, and the janitor said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And I think that this anecdote is just the perfect representation of how to ensure that everybody on your team is connected, aligned, and shares a common purpose and vision of what they're trying to build together. And then when it comes to scaling, I think another piece of advice that Tariq gave us that I think he's been an incredible leader at demonstrating, and that I want to bring back again, is also the ability to have faith in your talent, the ability to put your trust in people before they've earned it, so to speak. And one of the topics we discussed with him is the scale anticipation fallacy, which refers to judging a team's ability to scale too fast, like looking at a team and saying, actually, they're not going to be able to do it because they don't have the capabilities and the knowledge to grow, which sometimes leads us to not give them the opportunities to grow. And I think that something that Tariq's done in scaling his organization that I really have so much admiration for is that he creates space for the less experienced team members to grow as the company scales. His point of view, and I couldn't agree more, is that while experienced leaders bring in a lot of knowledge and ways of doing things, they're less likely to think dynamically outside the box, to try things that they've never tried before. And if you're in a small company and you're scaling, it means usually that you're doing something that hasn't been done a million times before. And what matters is not to focus just on the expertise of the people who are going to help you to grow the business, but also on their attitude. And Tariq shared with us a few tips about how to find those people, how to interview them, how to make sure that they have the right spirit. And as he was sharing that, on the one hand, it gets me to reflect about how can I do that for my teams? How can I make sure that I create the right environment for them to grow and scale and to truly take on more and more responsibility? And at the same time, it reminded me of the generosity that I had been afforded when I was in my early days in my career, which again goes back to that company keyword. I see that my mother is actually in the audience today, so the story involves her, which is, I don't know if all of you know, but I studied architecture, and I kind of knew relatively early on that I maybe was not going to be an architect. In fact, probably because I've always wanted to have a global career, and I felt like architecture, wish I'd known that when I was 18, but by the time I was in my early 20s, I felt like architecture was going to bound me to one location. And so I decided to apply for a job. And so my first job was at Keyword, and my first task was we had an e-commerce website for books, and I had to write book reviews. And yeah, it was fun for the first week, but quickly I was bored out of my mind. But I was, since my mother was not quite happy with my decision to change careers potentially, she had decided to stop paying for my tuition. She's like, great, if you want to change careers, then you can pay for your own education and you better finish your diploma, which I did, luckily. But I think what I wanted to talk about is how I was given the opportunity to grow, which was that I think the CEO of the company, Cyril, could see, I wasn't really thrilled by the repetitiveness and the lack of challenge by the work I was asked to do. And so he walked in one day and he's like, why don't you write a business plan for this business idea that we have? And I was an architect. I didn't even know what a business plan was. But I Googled it and found a template and tried to use it and did a first version, and probably it was not that great. But Cyril kind of took that on and helped me to grow. And every week, I think he would think up a new challenge for me to figure out, and I would Google my way out of it. And what that really created for me was an opportunity to, first of all, realize that even though I didn't come from the right education and didn't have the right diploma, it didn't mean that I couldn't develop my circle of competence. And eventually I went from being an architect to being the leader of a tech company. I went from, being a digital talent after my first 10 years at Keyword to becoming the CMO of a real estate company and managing an opera. And I think that all goes back to someone believing in me and giving me opportunity to grow and learn, and removing my imposter syndrome. And there's no better advice, I think, than that advice that Tariq gave us. For me, it's been life-changing. It's what allowed me to have the confidence to start Cosmic Centaurs, and now to lead, a team that is global and that I'm hoping, will have a lot of amazing opportunity and growth. And so I think we are here to talk about, global teams and scaling teams, and the advice that comes through again and again, whether from Pieter, who was supposed to be here to talk about compliance, but we ended up talking about people, and Tariq, who told us how scaling is, of course, yes, about setting up the right processes and structure and systems, but is also about people. And I think the big lesson for me there is people who care about people make companies grow and make companies succeed. And so that's kind of my recap. I see we have a few questions here from the audience, so let me take them. But I do hope that that message lingers with you. People who care about people make companies grow. And with that, let's see a couple of questions here. Daniela says, what advice do you have for team leaders who aspire to go global? So I'm going to assume that these team leaders work for companies that are going global and they want to manage a global workforce. And I think I can just share what I did. I read a lot. I went on all sorts of management magazines. I was completely obsessed about understanding how to be a better leader. I asked for advice. I made mistakes. I retrospected. I learned about other cultures. I got an education through INSEAD when I felt like I needed more. It's not native to us to hire and manage people from other cultures. Even when you think you're highly emotionally intelligent, there's so much you don't understand about the world that people live in. And I think being curious and being willing to learn and to be given feedback and to try things out, and to have the courage to reach out to people and be vulnerable in front of them is really essential. And I think my advice to team leaders in general, and that applies for team leaders who want to manage globally, is also that you should focus on both engagement and performance. So never lose sight of what your team needs to accomplish. Never remove pressure. There's no reason just because someone's from a different culture or doesn't agree with you, or you know what your team needs to accomplish. It's on you to get it done, but also exercise compassion and vulnerability and openness and curiosity, and be obsessing about how you engage your team and obsessing about how you make them feel meaningful and aligned, and how they connect to each other, I think are all really important. And Karim asked a similar question, so I'm hoping that I've answered it. Rhea says, people who care about people make companies grow, something people take for granted. How can we remind people of that when many seem to get caught up in KPIs? It's a really great question. And luckily for you, Rhea, there's a lot of data around. So what I just said about caring about both engagement and performance, there's a lot of data to actually demonstrate that leaders that do that actually outperform those who only focus on one of the two. If you want, in a second, I can get you a couple of links. There's one from Gallup that actually looked at, I think, more than 10,000 employees and surveyed them about the impact of leadership that cared about one or the other. I'm going to post it. I hope it makes it to you. And if not, the team will repost it in a minute. But I think there's a lot of data to show that good leaders focus on both, right? And psychological safety creating the right environment, allowing people to be friends with each other. This week I posted on LinkedIn about all the positive outcomes of friendships at work in terms of improving everything, performance, retention, loyalty. We should not underestimate those things and their ability to impact the outcomes of an organization. But that doesn't mean we don't focus on KPIs and performance and make sure that people are under pressure to deliver, to do good work. People want to do good work, and their leader's job is to get them there, I think. And so focusing on both those things is really, really important. And then Kerma on the team asks me, what was my favorite topic or episode? Kerma, you know the answer, all of them. I don't think that I could highlight one, because every single episode has been an opportunity to learn something, and every chapter has taught us something. And in fact, that brings me perhaps to listing everybody who contributed to our episodes and perhaps thanking them one by one. So Connie Hadley, Sam Yates, Sylvia Burberry, David Mulyanepte, Jonathan Yeo, Sonal Bal, Chase Warrington, Saima Siddiqui, Hayley Lewis, Helen Dunnett, Lucy Dabo, Tariq Saiduddin, and Pieter Mandem. So many amazing insights from all of you. We have learned so much. Our audience has learned so much. We are so incredibly grateful for that. And I hope that this season has helped, some of you become better leaders, become better team members. And I do hope that you continue to tune in, because as I mentioned earlier, next week is our 2-year anniversary. And as is our tradition in the Cosmics, we have prepared quite a bit of content for you. And we do hope that you tune in and you support us. As always, this video will be available on LinkedIn forever. We'll repost it on YouTube and our website. And if you miss us as this season comes to an end and you want to make sure you don't miss out on our content, do join us on cosmiccentors.com and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you get all of our updates. And stay tuned. I look forward to seeing all of you next week as we celebrate our 2-year anniversary and beyond. Thank you.